Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Wake Up with Ashland. My name is Cameron Walpole. I'm here today with a really special guest. We've got the Thomas D. Clark Professor of History from the University of Kentucky, Dr. Mark Summers, here with us today. He has written lots of books about 19th century politics. You can find them all over the place, I'm sure. Dr. Summers is going to be talking to us a little bit about something that's been in the news lately, the filibuster. This is something that I think we all have a pretty good understanding of what it does, but not necessarily a great understanding of its past. It's up for debate again now, the filibuster rule. So you're probably seeing a lot of headlines, who's on what side. So we're just going to kind of rewind a little bit and talk about the history of the filibuster. So, Dr. Summers, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me on the program. Most
Great.
kind of you.
It's so great to see you. I hope you can tell us just a little bit about what the filibuster does. What is it used for?
Sure. Well, the whole idea of the filibuster is that those people that engage in it are basically trying to stall things. They try to talk forever if they can, or as long as they can, to delay action or a vote on a bill or a measure, a resolution. It's been around more or less since the very beginning of Congress. The term goes back a lot further than that. As a matter of fact, it comes from a Dutch term back from the 1600s called vrijbuiter, I guess it is, which if you actually translate it literally into English means freebooter, which is another name for pirate, which is where it's from. The French and Spanish turned it into the word filibuster, which also means pirate. And all the way up to the 1850s, if you ever use the word filibuster, everybody immediately knows what you mean. You mean people who are armed warriors, a private army that invades another country to try to take it over. And we have these kind of things sailing out of New Orleans, out of New York, that are trying to take over Cuba. They try to take over Nicaragua. They land an army. They create their own private government. And basically, they stand a very good chance of being shot or garroted if it comes to that. It's only around the 1850s that people begin to use this to talk about senators who are really just trying to clog the process of the way things work. And after that, filibuster is for people that talk and talk and talk and talk just to try to stop everything flowing. So that's kind of really what it means. I don't think it was ever used about anybody in the Senate until about 1853, something like that. And even then, it's hardly ever used at all. But, that's the other thing. The filibuster itself was hardly even used at all. It's just kind of striking. You look at it and say from 1789 up to, well, maybe the early 20th century, senators didn't do that kind of stuff. It was much more likely you'd find something like that in the House. And you don't do it by speaking forever because you wouldn't be allowed to do that in the House. What you basically do, as you rise, you say, suggest the absence of a quorum. And then they have to call off the roll of everybody in the House. And as soon as it's done, somebody else says, move to adjourn. And then you have to call the roll of everybody in the House. And then somebody grabs up and says, suggest the absence of a quorum. You can basically stop things dead without ever having to talk to yourself. So, that kind of process is right there. But the striking thing, again, is that, all the way through Henry Clay's time, senators just, for the most part, just didn't filibuster, maybe because they felt this isn't the kind of thing you do. I mean, this isn't appropriate conduct. I give you an example, and this is right out of Henry Clay's career. We all know about this. In 1850, Henry Clay offers a compromise package that can really solve the basic slavery issues. And one part of it is bringing in the state of California as a free state. Another part that gets tacked on is a fugitive slave law that essentially will accuse people who are accused of being fugitive slaves can be arrested and without trial, without right to lawyer, without writ of habeas corpus or anything else, can basically be judged by a commissioner and sent into slavery, whether they were slaves or not. Now, you look at those two bills, and if you're a strong Southern rights person, you hate the California bill. You know that it takes the richest part of the West that you've taken from Mexico, the one part that slavery could thrive in, and slavery's locked off from it. If there's something you die in the ditch not to let through, it's that bill. And if you're a Northerner, a Northern Whig in particular of Henry Clay's party, the fugitive slave law is a violation of everything that the Bill of Rights stands for. Now, you would assume that to stop those bills, those Southern rights people would have talked until kingdom come to prevent that California bill going through, that Northern senators would run out the clock to keep the fugitive slave bill from going through. But they don't. They don't. They argue against it and they allow it to come to a vote, and they lose that vote, even though for them it's a life or death situation. In other words, the filibuster doesn't have the power that it's later going to have. It's a very rare kind of thing. And that kind of brings it up to Henry Clay in 1841.
Yeah.
When he wants a bill to create a national bank. That's a bank that would have branches in every state in the Union. It would issue a paper currency that's good anywhere. It's a vital thing. And you know how long the Democratic filibuster against this bill lasts? About 4 days. And that's about it. They don't expect to stop the bill. They don't expect to tire people out on this bill. They just want to talk. And even that, which isn't really meant to block the bill and the rest, makes Henry Clay and the Whigs so angry that they talk about trying to change the rules to really gag all this stuff, to muzzle people, which tells you, in fact, how exceptional this kind of talking actually is. And tells you that in many ways it's a very different world under Henry Clay, but that kind of 4-day filibuster is like an inkling of what we're going to see burgeon and become mammoth when you get into the 20th century, even if it's kind of eccentric.
That's fascinating. I'm hoping that you can tell us maybe a little bit more about the National Bank. That's something that I think a lot of people who maybe have studied Clay's life know a little bit about, but maybe we've forgotten it since we've taken our history classes. But can you tell us a little bit about the National Bank and why Clay was so passionate about it?
Okay, that's a very good question, a very important question. The National Bank would be a private agency in partnership with the government. And every time revenue comes in from the government, every time they sell land, every time they collect a tax on goods coming into the country, all of that money would go into the vaults of the National Bank. And the National Bank, as a private agency, could use it and lend it out and then, collect interest on it. But it's also a nice, safe place for the government to put its money. Now, Democrats thought that this kind of government-business partnership means that you got a bank that is going to be stronger than any other bank. It could run them out of business. The government has no business chartering a corporation. It has no business creating this kind of monopoly. And that if you have a company that is too big, and that National Bank, by the standards of the day, is going to be big, it's going to have the power to turn the screws on congressmen, to buy congressmen, to elect other congressmen to replace them. I mean, you don't want it. But if you were Henry Clay, you'd say, we absolutely need a national bank. And here's why. Now today, let me give you an example out there. Okay, he grabs his wallet and so on. See this? Okay, look at this. You see what this is? This is a dollar bill. Everybody has those in their wallets, or might have them in the wallets if they're lucky enough. Okay, simple enough. Back then, though, basically a piece of paper money like that is basically an IOU. It's a piece of paper that says, this is $1. You can go in and ask a dollar's worth of gold, dollar worth of silver in a bank. Well, in those days, this isn't the only paper money. Imagine if there were somewhere between 3,000 and 7,000 different kind of dollar bills, because that's what you got. Because every single bank can issue its own dollars out there. And about half of those dollars are, in fact, counterfeit. And a lot of those dollars come from Wildcat banks, which has nothing to do with UK Wildcat. A Wildcat bank is one that's issuing this paper money and it's lending it out and it's collecting gold and silver and interest for it. But if you bring that paper money into the bank, they go, hey, we have no gold, we have no silver. Sorry, that paper money, you know what it is? It's worthless. It's, hey, it's like this paper here. We take it, we throw it away, just like that. You've been taken. Well, that's the difference. The National Bank creates a paper currency that no matter in what state you are, you know it's good. Because in its vaults, it's got that gold and silver. It's got that government gold and silver to pay it off. In other words, for the first time, you can create a stable currency. And the country doesn't have one. So if you're Henry Clay and the country is hurting from a depression, and it is, one thing the people need is a currency they can trust. You need a national bank, and you need it now. So that's really the story.
So this is part of
that's the crucial story of the national bank. And I might add, he doesn't get it, but it's not because of the filibuster. And Henry Clay, even when he is uttering imprecations against the Democrats, he knows that's not where the danger is. The real danger is the president of the United States that his party had elected as vice president. And then, of course, the president, being very inconsiderate, had died 1 month into office. So John Tyler is president now. And John Tyler does not want a national bank. And that's one reason why the Democrats probably wouldn't want to have a long filibuster. Why should you? Because basically, Henry Clay and his bank bill are basically a supercharged race straight to the guillotine. I mean, when it gets to the White House, the president is going to veto that bank bill. It's going to go nowhere. And so I think that one of the reasons why Henry Clay is so huffy against the Democrats and their obstruction tactics is because he's got to find somebody to blame that's not his own party. And if you can basically point to those guys, a lot of the Whigs out there are going to get behind you, and they're going to say, yeah, we're not going to let the Democrats do this. Yeah, we're going to pass this bill, and we're just going to hope suddenly that there's kind of a miracle, where, in fact, the president is going to change his mind, although the president, in fact, doesn't change his mind. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer.
No. That's exactly what we want to hear.
Okay.
I want to let our viewers at home know that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we can hopefully get those answered for you. So let us know along the way if you have any questions. Dr. Summers, I'm fascinated to hear that the filibuster hasn't always been kind of a mainstay in the Senate. So can you talk a little bit about some other delaying tactics that might have been used later in the 19th century?
Yeah, well, there are others. And in fact, if you want to find the real delaying tactics that work, the ones that really work are in places like the House. In fact, one of the ways in the House, essentially, the filibuster is forbidden. It's, they're so bothered by this kind of talk that in 1842, a year after Henry Clay's complaint about this filibuster, the House essentially says, you can't talk forever. You're not allowed. In point of fact, that's going to happen. But there's all kinds of other ways that Democrats can stop things if they want. And one of the best of those ways that they found worked very well for a long time is something called the disappearing quorum. The disappearing quorum works like this, okay? Basically, you want to have do business in the House of one kind or another, you need to have a minimum number of people there. It might be like half of the people have to be there to do business. And this is a really big deal because, back before the Constitution, when we had the Continental Congress, what you had to do is you had to have at least something like 9 of the 13 states present. And in 1784, when Congress met, do you know how many days of that session you actually had as many as 9 states showing up? 1, 2, 3. That's it, which means you can't get things done. That's what quorum's for, okay? So you're a Democrat and the Republicans got control of the House. Maybe they've got, a 10 vote control, 20 vote control. They're all going to vote the way the party line wants them to go vote. So how do you keep them from getting a vote on anything? Well, it's simple, disappearing quorum. And how that works is you come and you sit in your seats and you're there in case the Republicans have everybody there. But, some people are sick every day and some people are off arguing law cases and some of them are visiting their family. Not all the Republicans are going to be there. And if none of the Democrats are there and maybe only 90% of the Republicans, then you wouldn't have a quorum and you couldn't do business. So what the Democrats do is they come in there And then they say, suggest the absence of a quorum. And the clerk calls off the roll, Mr. Alger, Mr. Andy, Mr. Andrew, and so on. And the Democrats just sit in their seat and they don't say anything. And if they don't answer their names, it's as if they're not there, which means you don't have a quorum, you can't do business. I mean, that's the way it works.
Yeah.
So you can stop everything cold. So you got, for example, in 1875, you got this bill that is going to go through Congress that is going to protect voters' rights in the South. The Democrats don't want to do that because they've stolen those elections fair and square. They've killed a whole lot of people in order to get the majorities they want. And the idea that you're actually going to create a level playing field absolutely terrifies them. So what do? Disappearing quorum. You know that there's a lot of Republicans that are not going to show up at the end of the session, and you just run the clock out. You just keep saying, suggest the absence of a quorum. You shut up when you're in your seats. They can't do business. And at the end of the session, that election bill, it's dead. It's gone. Nothing can happen to it. That's one way of doing it. In fact, though, if you go to the Senate, probably the first big filibuster that actually can do anything doesn't happen until early 1917. You want me to talk about that or not?
I'd love for you to talk about it. Why not?
If you can. All right. But, it's not the most sensational filibuster. Huey Long's is that. And that's a real hoot. And in fact, that's in the 1930s. Maybe I'll talk about that later. But, okay. 1917. The German Empire, the Second Reich of the Kaiser, has decided and announced that they are going to sink without warning any neutral ship on the high seas. They're basic with their U-boats, with their submarines. Well, what are you going to do about this? This means that every American ship is a threat. The president, Woodrow Wilson, doesn't want to go to war. So his idea is he wants Congress to give him the power to arm merchant ships so that they can shoot back at submarines. Now, he asks for this just a few days before Congress expires on March 4th. A bunch of senators out there look at this and they're really alarmed. They say, number one, this isn't going to work. I mean, the British, they've got these armed merchant ships. They've had these ships all the time along. And the simple truth of the matter is that it's never protected any of them. What this really means is the president is going to ask for something that essentially will throw us into a war without Congress being allowed to declare war. And so what do? We got to run out the clock and we've got to filibuster. And you got about 10 senators there that the president calls a little group of willful men that have 2 days left in the session, and they just talk and they offer quorum calls and they keep talking until they kill this bill. And on March 4th, the Congress is out, and theoretically, the next Congress won't appear until next December. That's the way things work. In fact, if they're trying to prevent war, it doesn't work, because if the president doesn't get that armed merchantman bill, he feels he's got no choice. He's got to call a special session of Congress, and he's got to ask for a formal declaration of war, which is how we get into World War I. So that's a mighty important filibuster right there.
That's fascinating. One thing that I'm hearing as you're talking about this is that they're going to use every trick in the book, right? They're going to use everything at their disposal. So I'm wondering if you have a favorite story that you wouldn't want to tell about maybe a senator.
It's kind of like my favorite filibuster.
Okay, let's hear your favorite filibuster.
Yeah, it's 1935, and it's a one-man show. I mean, when Bob La Follette and George Norris and the rest do this thing in 17, there's about 10 of them. They can relay, which means that, every time you want to go out to get a sandwich, every time you want to, as they say, answer the call of nature, you got time to get off the floor. Somebody will take over. Mm-hmm. Huey Long, Louisiana. Huey Long is a remarkably talented guy. He loves to clown. He is the most dangerous clown that you are going to see in public life until Stephen King starts writing things like stuff like that. And in 1935, he's really bothered by a bill that'll keep him from, appointing all of his friends to office in a government agency. So he starts his filibuster, and he does it all alone. He has no support from anybody. And it's just an incredible kind of game. I mean, he does a wonderful job of it, essentially, because, he's just going to talk about anything to stall things. I mean, he does things. He reads parts of the plays of Shakespeare. He takes time out in the speech to give the Senate an idea of how exactly you fry oysters in the right way, and how to create Roquefort salad dressing. He even teaches them in the thing how to prepare pot liquor, and use a wastebasket as the kind of container that you'd make this kind of drink and stuff in there out there. And when he runs out of other topics, he asks the other senators if they can suggest things to talk about. And when they won't say anything, he says to the reporters in the gallery, okay, you guys up there, give me some topics. And they send down things like, talk about Frederick the Great of Prussia, talk about Judah P. Benjamin of Louisiana, the Confederate Secretary of State back, and so on. And he does things like even read the U.S. Constitution, which one humorist, Will Rogers, says probably it's the first time that a lot of the senators had ever heard of the Constitution, and many of them thought he was probably reviewing a new book. And he spends his time, how do you keep on talking if you get hungry? Well, the answer is you have people bring in sandwiches, but you can't eat a sandwich because you can't talk and eat a sandwich. So he'll tear off bits of it and roll them up into little balls and then put them in his pocket and keep chewing while he talks. And he's able to do this for about 15 hours until about 4 in the morning when, his bladder can't take it anymore and he has to yield the floor. I mean, it's just an incredible kind of tour de force. It's the kind of thing that I think probably inspires the, Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Jimmy Stewart up there, reading the Constitution and get on top of the Capitol Dome and see that lady that stands for liberty, and, just wonderful, just powerful kind of stuff out there. Well, all of that kind of stuff, it seems to me, is probably the most sensational filibuster there ever was. And it really doesn't do what Huey Long intended, except get him headlines, but maybe that was really what he intended in the first place. So it's a really great filibuster. It's my favorite filibuster story.
Favorite filibuster. We all have one. You know what, Dr. Summers, we have a question from somebody who's watching, from Katrina Harper. She says, thank you, such a captivating presentation and subject. What, if any, changes would you make, Dr. Summers, to the current filibuster rules?
Well, I can see how sometimes in desperate situations a filibuster may well be necessary. But one thing I do to change it is basically I'd say anybody that says they're going to filibuster, they got to filibuster. It's not enough to say, I intend to filibuster this bill, and everyone goes, oh, well, then we better tiptoe around it.
Sure.
Such. If you're going to do it, you better be a Huey Long, and you better get up on the floor, and you better spiel, and you better talk and talk and talk. It's as simple as that. But I also, frankly, would say I think filibusters ought to be as rare as possible because they're turning into an all-purpose weapon. And this was not anything the founders intended. How rare they were in the founding period. In 1805, there was a rule already on the floor. It had been there from the beginning that essentially prevented filibusters. And the Vice President of the United States said, we don't need this rule. It's not necessary. Nobody's ever going to filibuster. Nobody's ever going to talk that way. And the Senate said, yeah, you're right. Nobody'd be stupid enough to do something like that. I mean, that would be very uncollegial and so on. So I would say it's really like certain kind of other things. Make it hard, make it rare to have a filibuster. Because otherwise, it's so easy to clog things up completely. And it ultimately makes the Congress into a kind of a laughingstock that really can't get things done. Frankly, it seems to me that I think the La Follettes and the rest in 1917, they really did have a clear and present danger. They were really seeing a fear of war that they wanted to prevent. Mm-hmm. But those kind of circumstances are mighty rare. They don't happen all that often. And I think it ought to be a weapon in the arsenal, kind of like impeachment, that should be used extremely, extremely rarely when you don't have any kind of other alternative on a matter that's vital.
That's really, I think, a good way of summing up the case for that. Do we have any other questions from our viewers at home? And in the meantime, I was hoping, Dr. Summers, that you could show us your tie.
Oh, my tie. Yes. Yeah. Well, what we've got here signers of the Constitution that I was wearing. I figured I wanted something that had something to do with Constitution and its powers. I figured that my tie that had on it, cans of Spam probably wouldn't serve the same kind of purpose out there.
It might have drawn our Midwestern audience in a little bit more, but
well, it might. And in fact, I think I bought it at the Hormel meat plant in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. Because I had several daughters that went to college in Minnesota, which I think is an absolutely wonderful state. It may not have quite as much snow as I like, but it's quite a wonderful place.
Well, I have one more question for you.
Go ahead.
If we have any questions from the audience, I was just hoping you could talk a little bit. It's just something that has really been fascinating as we've been talking. This idea that it was used so rarely during Clay's time that it kind of seemed, it was unseemly. It wasn't the way that we operate. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how that change has occurred, and because it's fairly common now. Are senators that different now?
Yes, they are different. They're different in a lot of different ways. The filibuster begins to get a workout in the 1950s and 60s, coming out of the Deep South to try to block civil rights legislation. And in fact, it's a very powerful force all the way through the early 60s, because you need 2/3 of the votes to actually shut this kind of stuff down. In the 1970s, it becomes 3/5 of the votes, about 60 out of 100 senators. So it's a little easier to shut it down, but not that easy. But the fact of the matter is, increasingly, what you've got is senators that are much less collegial than they were before. You look in the 1870s and 80s and 90s, you look in the 1950s, and the Senate in many ways has the feeling of a private club. You can have senators that fulminate against each other on the floor, and then they go out for drinks together, or they're very close to each other. I give you an example from the 1850s. You want the voice of, say, the Southern rights pro-slavery position. Who do you think of? Future president, Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Of course you do, of Mississippi. You want to talk about the person that had spoken of a higher law than the Constitution in favor of ending slavery, the voice of anti-slavery. You think of William Seward of New York, who's going to be Lincoln's Secretary of State. Now, no two people could be further apart ideologically. And no two people could be closer friends in the Senate than these two guys. Basically, there is that sense of closeness and collegiality. You look at, say, in the House, you got people like Alexander Stephens of Georgia, who's going to be the Confederate vice president. You got Abraham Lincoln, who, of course, is going to be the president in wartime that's fighting against the Confederacy. And these people remain friends all the way through their career. It's different. It's not that way in the Senate anymore. There really is much more of a die-in-the-ditch mentality there. And that die-in-the-ditch mentality means you use any kind of stick you can to beat the other guys.
Sure.
And this, in almost any kind of politics, is very, very dangerous, because it means that when you come in, the temptation to say anything goes is going to be what you're going to do. It's going to be like, say, in the Deep South in the late 1800s. You come into power, the first thing you do is start changing the voting laws to make sure that there's never going to be an election where you got an opposition, because everything is a matter of make or break. I think that's what we're coming to, and I think that's frighteningly dangerous. I think that lack of collegiality and reaching across the aisles is one of those things that is badly weakening our ability to function as a major state in the world. Well, but again, that's my own fearful opinion. And I'm afraid everything after 1877 is just current events to me.
It's just current events. That's right. Well, Dr. Summers, it has been such a pleasure talking to you this morning. Our viewers at home, I hope that we all have a little bit more, I know I do, context of what the filibuster is. So when we're reading the headlines, we can understand them a little bit more. So Dr. Summers, thank you so much. We're all going to go watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And if everybody watches Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, then, you know, as Alina Lamont in Singing in the Rain would say, then all of my talk ain't been in vain for nothing.
Oh, hold on. I think we might have one more question.
Oh my.
I'm gonna answer it if
Jacob
you
Wood.
have the
Oh,
time.
hello, Jacob. How are you out there? Are there general circumstances that push politicians away from collegiality and turning total warfare politics? Yeah, there are things. If in fact you have a public that is so polarized that there's no kind of independent voters in the middle, and there are people that are going to vote for their side no matter what happens, oh yeah, because you don't have to worry about reaching outside your party. You're in a kind of situation like back in the 1860s, where there's a story about the Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, and there's two disputed congressmen, people running for seeking a congressional seat, and Stevens comes in, and one of the members of his party says, "Doesn't matter how you vote," he said, "because you know they're both rascals." He says, "Yeah, but which one is our rascal?" I mean, once you begin to have that, you got a problem. And I think a lot of that is exactly what's happening, and that can change things very, very dramatically. Um, is there a cure for it? Well, there are some cures that are kind of worse than maybe worse than the disease, but there are things that actually can be tried. You know, for a long time in California in the primaries, they were kind of open primaries so that you could vote in either primary. So you want in the Republican primary, you're a Democrat and you really don't want reactionary guys to win, you vote in the Republican primary and you vote for somebody like Hiram Johnson, who's a progressive. As simple as that. So, you know, there are kind of ways that you can moderate things. But as I said, things like this can also be like a cure that's worse than the disease, because you know what happens in California politics? Because, in fact, they can vote for anybody. What essentially happens is in the 1920s and 30s is a lot of the Republicans, knowing that they got the state in the bag, will all go into the Democratic primary and they'll vote for a Republican candidate so that he's on the ballot for both the Democratic and the Republican side, and people don't have any choice but to vote for Hiram Johnson. So there are solutions out there, but you have to be really careful about how you use them.
Well, I think
Alrighty.
that's a good place to end it.
Really?
And we thank you so much, Dr. Summers, for coming.
Oh yeah, glad to be of help.
Us. Well,
Okay.
we might bring you back again. I'm sure some Henry Clay political things will be coming up in the news again.
Sure. I'm always there.
Great.
Whenever you like me. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Viewers at home, thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll see you next week. I think Eric's got another presentation from his Artifact Adventure series. So we'll see you all then. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Have a great week.
Sure.